So at this time, I'll call to order the public hearing for Bylaw 2018-03. The purpose of the bylaw is to set out locations where cannabis retail stores may be allowed, subject to approval by the town and the Alberta Liquor and Gaming Commission. So just to be clear, this is not about anything except locations for cannabis retail stores. There won't be any discussion about where people can use cannabis in the community at this time. The public hearing will proceed as follows. First, administration will provide an overview of the matter under consideration, and then council will have an opportunity to ask questions of administration. And after the council question period is finished, then I'll invite members of the public to speak. And please identify yourself clearly when you take the mic. Once anyone is present who wishes to speak has done so, the municipal clerk will read into the record the names of anyone who's provided written comment. And finally, before we adjourn, administration will have an opportunity to provide closing comments. After the meeting is adjourned, then the municipal clerk will publish a record of public submissions. That includes all the written submissions regarding this matter, regardless of whether the author is here or not. And with that, I will move directly into item 2, administrative briefing.
Good evening, Mayor Borroman and members of Town Council. My name is Richard Williams and I'm the Junior Planner here at the Town of Canmore, and today I'll be providing an overview of the proposed land use amendment, Cannabis Retail Store, and provide a brief overview of the results from the online survey. Just to reiterate the definition that we're looking at including in the land use bylaw, it's a cannabis retail store, which is a retail establishment licensed under provincial authority for the sale of cannabis for consumption off premises, where four walls must physically separate the premises from any other business. And we're looking at introducing that use into commercial and direct control districts here in the town. And this is a map that shows all the commercial and direct control districts here in Canmore that currently have a liquor store as a discretionary use. We've got Town Centre, oh, this one doesn't work. Town Centre in the middle there, Gateway, Town Centre, Gateway, Bow Valley Trail, you got Silvertip, Spring Creek. Oh, here we go. There's Town Centre there. Gateway in this area here, Bow Valley Trail running down Bow Valley Trail, Silvertip, the Spring Creek, Three Sisters, and some direct control mixed use districts here in Palliser, local commercial and direct control out in Cougar Creek. We're looking at amending the general section and introducing the cannabis retail store to align with the requirements for a liquor store or a drinking establishment, just adding it to the end and proposing the same requirements for a liquor store. That is, there's no separation distance between liquor stores and a cannabis retail store, or no separation distance between the stores themselves, and no restriction to operating hours, the same as a liquor store. We had an online survey out between the 6th of March and the 29th of March and received 432 responses to that online survey. It was available on the website, and the responders self-select. They chose to do that on their own accord. And some results from that survey. So we asked if there should be a change to the setback for a school, elementary, middle or high school, and 56% of responders said yes, it should be more than 100 metres. 7.2% of responders said make it a little bit closer, and 35% said 100 metres is appropriate. And that setback requirement is set by AGLC. We're not looking at introducing that specifically within the bylaw. That's their own requirement. And further to that, this is a graph for hospitals where 30% said make the setback larger than the AGLC 100 metre setback requirement. 38% said 100 metres is okay, and 27% said make it less than 100 metres. We asked if there was any other areas in town where people would like to see it restricted or prohibited. 24% of people said yes, and 76% said no, and it would be inferred that the commercial and direct control districts would be all that's required there. We also asked, should there be any separation distance? 25% said there doesn't need to be a separation distance between cannabis retail stores. 27% said they only want to see one cannabis retail store per block, and 47% said it doesn't matter, you can, there shouldn't be any other restrictions to the location of a cannabis retail store. We also asked around the operating hours. 66% said have the same operating hours as a liquor store, and 33% said shorter. And that concludes my presentation and overview of the survey results, and I would be open to any questions should you have any.
Thank you, sir. And just to put the distance in context for me, since I missed first reading meeting, what would the distance be from Lawrence Grassie School to Main Street?
It's approximately to the street itself. It's 125 metres to the street itself from the property boundary of Lawrence Grassie. So that means the properties on both sides of the street would be outside of that AGLC 100 metre setback distance.
The entire length of the street, or just within a radius?
The town centre district is beyond, is 103, 104 metres from the boundary of the school.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions from members of council? Way of clarification? Seeing none, thanks for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Then I will invite at this time members of the public to come to the podium and give us your name and your perspective. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Tim Anderson, and my comment has to do with separation distances between cannabis stores and other cannabis stores. Hello, Mayor and councillors. My name is Tim Anderson. I've been pestering some of the people in this room who work for the town with emails and face-to-face meetings for over a year now. The reason for my cannabis anxiety is because I knew what was going to happen. I knew out-of-town cannabis businesses were going to come into Canmore and steamroll local entrepreneurs. Unsurprisingly, it's exactly what's happened, but I'd say even more aggressively than I thought. My understanding is that at least 4 leases for cannabis stores have already been signed as of February. It's also my understanding that most, if not all, are out-of-town businesses and chains. One of these leases that was signed, I know the situation all too well, as I was involved in it. I had a location I was interested in back in early February and had my general contractor taking measurements of the space when I got a call. One of my out-of-town competitors heard I was looking at the space. They offered $10 more on the square foot, and without the landlord even hearing our counteroffer, the deal was over. All of this is to say, out-of-town businesses with very deep pockets funded by investor dollars were able to secure spots way ahead of legalization and beat out locals. Being able to legally purchase cannabis at a retail store likely won't happen until September. That's still 5 months away. And as of right now, there is not a single location in town for lease that is appropriate for a cannabis business to work. They've all been snatched up 5 months out by almost exclusively out-of-town businesses. That's not exaggeration. I have 3 different brokers working with me, and I'm driving them all nuts with daily texts. To level the playing field and give local business a chance, I ask for no buffers between cannabis stores and other cannabis stores. Not only does this give local business a chance to compete in the market, It also offers the community better choice. It allows for the best stores to prosper. One of these out-of-town cannabis chains has repeatedly stated, "We want to be the Starbucks of cannabis." Unless you're a stakeholder in the business, why would anyone want that? When I travel to New York or San Francisco, I don't hunt down the closest Starbucks. I hunt down one of the hundreds of other independently owned and better coffee shops. The town deserves cannabis stores that represent the community and gives back to it, that are proud to be a part of Canmore. With buffers between stores, first come, first serve wins. This is a shame when the first one in simply wants to set up a generic shop and become the Starbucks of cannabis. As a cannabis entrepreneur and having friends who have been through the same ordeal in California with their cannabis shops, I know it's important to see from both sides of the story. It's easy to imagine some people not wanting a town with an overabundance of cannabis shops, and it's a valid point. In Canmore, this likely isn't going to be an issue. What many who are jumping into this industry aren't aware of is a retail cannabis license isn't a golden ticket to financial success. There will be winners and there will be losers, just like any other business. A perfect example is liquor stores right in the core of downtown Canmore. A year ago, there were 3, and now there are 2. It could be argued that the stronger 2 survived. It should be the same with cannabis. We need to let all entrepreneurs have an opportunity to participate. Let the best shop win. Perhaps in the future, it will make sense to limit the number of cannabis stores in town and put a moratorium in place. However, at this point, I believe local entrepreneurs should be allowed the opportunity to compete. With a number of out-of-town cannabis stores in town with already signed leases before the regulations have even been drafted, the only way local entrepreneurs can eventually enter this exciting industry is if there are no buffers between cannabis stores and other cannabis stores. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Are there other members of the public wishing to speak this evening?
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Dr. Brent Friesen. I'm a public health and preventive medicine physician with Alberta Health Services, and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight with regards to the siting. I do have an overhead that I would like to project if possible.
I'll just remind all speakers that there's a 5-minute time limit. Thank you.
Great. So first of all, Alberta Health Services would like to acknowledge the tight timelines that municipalities have been operating under since the release of the federal framework for legalization and regulation of non-medical cannabis. And we also understand the approach that we're recommending to begin with as quite restrictive. And what I hope to do today is provide you with the rationale why we're recommending such an approach. I think it's important as we looked at the projection that I'm showing up on the overhead is what's called a public health approach. It's also known as the paradox of prohibition. And if you look at the far left in terms of the slide, you can see under an illegal market that currently exists for non-medical cannabis, that's where the harms related to that illegal market are maximized. On the other hand, if we go to the far right of the overhead, where there are no restrictions at all in terms of on the market, really the only restriction is one of our driver is corporate profit. You'll also see that also results in harms, and the examples of that we see probably best known are those of the tobacco industry, where there was misrepresentation of the safety of the product. There was deliberately targeting of youth and children to addict them, all in the interest of maximizing corporate profits. What Alberta Health Services is recommending at this stage of legalization of non-medical cannabis, that we take a more restrictive approach to try and aim in terms of towards the bottom of that curve, where we're allowing legalization of the product and that, but minimizing the harms associated with it. It's important to remember that with this more restrictive approach to regulation is not in spite of lack of evidence, but because early evidence we have suggests that there are serious potential harms associated with non-medical cannabis. We know from experience with alcohol and tobacco that it's much more challenging to create more restrictive regulations once harm is identified than it is to relax on necessary regulations. We know that exposure to smoke of any kind from any source is harmful to lungs, causing asthma attacks, heart attacks, lung cancer, among other impacts. And we know that normalization of smoking leads to more young people smoking, and that people under 25 are at highest risk for adverse effects related to cannabis consumption. And these are the facts that are compel us to advocate for more restrictive regulation. What we're recommending for the bylaw 2018-03 is to enhance or implement separation distances. So I think consistent with your survey of the public in Canmore is we're recommending implementing a 300-meter setback from all schools and vacant school reserves. We are also suggesting in terms of a 100-meter minimum distance from tobacco and liquor retailers, in addition to a square kilometer density restriction. And I realized when Mr. Hines was presenting, he was talking about direct control districts and that, so you may have that ability already in terms of your development bylaw to control the number of establishments. The other aspect that's not addressed in the AGLC regulations is to also incorporate childcare facilities. And I know that we're not talking to the consumption rules, but the concern would be if you have a cannabis retail outlet and there's no restriction on consumption outside of the 5 meters from a door or entranceway, and it's located next to a childcare facility, there's a potential for that exposure. So there is an interconnection with how you approach consumption. The other recommendation we have is on restricting the hours of operation to 10 or 11 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Friesen. Just to be clear, you're here officially representing Alberta Public Health Services?
Yes, representing Alberta Health Services.
Thank you. And I'll invite other members of the public to come forward and provide your perspective. Don't be shy. If you want to say something, now's your chance. Okay. Yay.
Hello, Council. I'm not sure if this is the time to ask this question.
Name? Excuse me.
My name is Wade Graham. Thank you. I'm not sure if this is the time to ask this question, but are we addressing grow operations and lounges at any point in time in the near future or at this council?
I'll turn to planning to answer that.
Not as part of this bylaw, but your question, as I understood it, was in the near future. In the future, yes. I don't know. My understanding is that consumption will not be permitted for at least the next year, so we might be back here in a year considering that. At this point, we have proposed to not address growing operations. They would fit under the existing bylaws, likely as an intensive agricultural operation, and the current limits would be in place on that.
So that's the simple answer, and as I mentioned, the bylaw we're hearing from tonight is simply around locations of retail.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else would like to come forward?
Hi, my name is Jossie Asnong. I've also submitted a written request or a written submission. I'm here on behalf of my condo board. I live in a mixed condo, it's a mixed residential and commercial building, and we recently received a request for a cannabis retailer to move into our building. And our board had several concerns. Obviously, we have children living in our building, and we just wanted to ask the question, what is the town of Canmore going to or how are they going to handle these mixed-use buildings? There are quite a few on Bow Valley Trail and other parts of town. We had lots of concerns, which I've submitted in the written. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to come forward at this time? Yes?
Good evening, Mayor Boroman and councillors. My name is Kristen Slagorski, and I'm thankful for this opportunity. I'm here tonight as a citizen of Canmore, though I've also worked in Canmore for Alberta Health Services as an addiction counsellor for the last 5 years. While working, part of my role is to promote well-being at the community level. The other part of my role is to connect with individuals during times that are challenging, to explore their goals and to support them with their aims. Their stories are difficult, and they've been shaped and influenced by our policy decisions. My focus tonight is to advocate that the town of Canmore create robust policy that is evidence-informed, coordinated with service partners, and part of a comprehensive plan that attends to the overall well-being of everyone in this community. As we have clearly learned from both tobacco and alcohol policy, starting with a free market approach causes harm. However, this is currently the approach that the planning department is using for this proposed bylaw. When it comes to bylaw, it all boils down to this. As availability increases, so too does consumption, and so too do the harms. The Senior Medical Officer of Health for AHS has compiled 2 documents which I will attach to my written submission. The first is titled AHS Recommendations on Cannabis Regulations for Alberta Municipalities. Specifically, it recommends that municipalities strengthen zoning regulations beyond the provincial requirements by using a combination of population and geographic-based formulas to restrict the number and location of cannabis outlet retailers. I would like to propose that the town amend the current bylaw to include the following 7 changes. Number 1, limit the number of business licenses issued in the first phase of implementation, especially given that the ALGC will also be providing online sales. Number 2, implement a 300 to 500 meter distance restriction between cannabis retail locations to prevent clustering. 3, implement a 300 meter distance between cannabis stores and schools, daycares, and community centers. With this recommendation, we're aiming to reduce the risks of access, exposure, and normalization of smoking. Simply stated, cannabis is known to be harmful to the developing brain. Number 4, implement a 100 meter minimum distance from tobacco and liquor retailers, in addition to a square kilometer density restriction adjusted for population. This particular recommendation reflects the research that shows simultaneous use of alcohol and cannabis amplifies one another's effects and has been found to approximately double the odds of impaired driving. Number 5, require a cannabis education component and community engagement plan be added to the application process for potential cannabis retailers. This recommendation ensures retailers demonstrate a knowledge base of safe use and health harms and fosters a healthy relationship with the community. This has been implemented by the City of Denver in 2017. Number 6, limit hours of operation. AHS recommends the town consider a 10 p.m. close on sales. International research on alcohol availability shows that longer hours of sales increase consumption rates and harms related to alcohol use. Staggering closing hours for cannabis retailers from liquor stores and bars also helps minimize the chance of co-use and spreads out the burden of managing public intoxication for law enforcement. Number 7, restrict cannabis retail stores within land use areas that are primarily multi-unit housing and/or designed for vulnerable populations, such as in current provisions 2.12 and 2.14, These are the Palliser affordability and attainable housing areas. With our community's long-standing housing crisis and shared ventilation in large buildings, I believe that permitting cannabis retail stores in these districts adds an undue strain to these vulnerable populations who do not have the resources or opportunities to easily move elsewhere. The second document I will leave you with is titled Public Health Perspectives on Cannabis Legalization in Alberta. It demonstrates the harms to health and social problems related to substances and reflects the continuum that Dr. Friesen showed you earlier today. Tonight, you have the opportunity to make upstream policy decisions that will be felt downstream in our community for years to come. You will have heard many views this evening, all of which are important to consider, and we need to balance the qualitative information with the quantitative. Frankly, there's a lot we still don't know about the risks and benefits, but that will become clear in the years to come. Let's start with what we know, and in the meantime, take care of one another. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any others who would like to speak this evening?
Hi, Mayor and Council. My name is Les Hagan. I'm with Action on Smoking and Health in Edmonton. I must admit, I came here to talk about public consumption. It wasn't perfectly clear on the website that it was just limited to the discussion about this bylaw, but hey, I'll happily come back to Canmore at any time to talk about public consumption. On the issue of land use, it's been pointed out by a couple of speakers that we have some other legal drug issues, including tobacco. And tobacco, in fact, kills 47 times more Canadians than cannabis. So any measures that Council is considering to restrict the sale and use of and regulation of cannabis can certainly be justified for tobacco. So any of the revisions or amendments you're looking at here regarding the zoning of cannabis, we would recommend that they also be applied to new tobacco retailers. The Municipal Government Act makes it clear that you can't work backwards and change the rules for existing retailers, but going forward you can certainly consistently apply those to new tobacco retailers. And our general message is that municipal councils and governments should be taking a more comprehensive approach to the regulation of legal drugs. Historically, of course, we've been dealing with tobacco and alcohol. We're adding a new one to the list called cannabis, but there is certainly in the public health world plenty of evidence that speaks to the need for governments and public health officials to deal with these drugs in a more consistent manner, especially when looking at the relative harm, and to ensure that the principles of fairness apply and proportionality when we're looking at the relative harm of all of these various legal drugs, which are in fact the leading causes of death resulting from drugs in Canada if we look at tobacco, liquor, and finally cannabis. So anyway, just a concern on our part, and we hope that Council will look beyond cannabis at the full scope of drug use and the use of legal substances here in Canmore. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak this evening? I'll give you one more chance. Anybody who'd like to speak that hasn't yet? One last time. Anybody like to speak? Thank you all very much. Some really well presented perspective. Look to the municipal clerk to read into the record any the names of written submissions. Maybe I'll help by turning that on.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. We received 4 written submissions, 2 from some people that spoke this evening, Alberta Health Services, Dr. Friesen and Josie Asnog. We also heard from the Compass Cannabis Clinic and Ryan Dowdell.
Thank you. And I'll look to administration, see if there's any final comments from admin.
Nothing to add at this time.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks very much for being here this evening. As I just said, I thought there was some very well presented perspective, and certainly will give Council pause for thought before we go forward with second and third reading. Thanks for being here, and with that, I will adjourn the public hearing.